Hey, good day, everyone. I'm Marty, also known as Raging Owlbear on social media, and I've been watching some of the social media channels, especially now that there's years into fifth edition. There's lots of new players, and there's a lot of people who are wanting to be a dungeon master, who are just getting into the DMing for the first time. And there's a common question that seems to be getting asked on social media, and that's how can I be a good DM? Now, over the years, there's been a lot of manuals, guides, as it were, about being a dungeon master. But one of the things that all these guides over the past few years haven't really done well is kind of talk about how to be a good DM. I mean, there is advice sort of sprinkled out in there, but it tends to be more on the side of mechanically how to sort of run the game and not necessarily how to be as it would, let's say, a servant leader, as it were, for your party, for your group. And especially if you look at the most recent fifth edition Dungeons Masters guide, you open it up and peruse the table of contents, and there's stuff on world building and gods of your pantheon and creating adventures and NPCs and stuff like that. But there's not really very much on actually running the game, the act of actually running the game. There's a whole bunch of world building, but there really isn't much in this version about running a good game. Now, ironically, fourth edition gets a lot of grief, but the D&D fourth edition Dungeon Master's Guide, and there's a Dungeon Master's Guide too, actually has a lot of really fantastic advice about running a game. I mean, like chapter one, you open it up, and like the very first chapter, how to be a DM, and then the next chapter is on running the game and running your table. Um, so ironically, the last edition has much better advice for those people just starting out. In the two Dungeon Masters guides they wrote. Now, there's also a lot of mechanical crunch that's specific to fourth edition. It may not necessarily be relevant to fifth edition, but if you have the opportunity to pick up the older DM's guide for fourth edition, these are actually really good resources. But be that as it may, I'm going to try to outline some sort of five-ish tips that I've sort of thought about in helping a new player, on their road to being a better dungeon master or game master. And so I'm going to try as concisely as I can to sort of boil down some of the basics. And I've kind of put them in sort of chronological order in the sense of in the order that you would perform your preparation in starting a game for your friends. So let's talk first about where you want to start, and that's a little thing called session zero. Now, session zero is kind of that just time when you get together with your buddies. You're like, hey, we want to play D&D. Let's make some characters. Let's talk about the game. You're not really running an adventure during session zero. You're just kind of getting together, or maybe talking on the phone or on Twitter, or wherever. Discord, actually, Discord is huge now, where people are just getting together to talk about what they want to play. And in session zero, you're basically trying to establish the expectations for everybody in the group. What kind of game are we going to play? Is it going to be like this really heroic high fantasy with, over the top mayhem? Or is it going to be more like gritty and low fantasy, maybe less magic, and or is it going to be more horror based? Is it going to be sword and sorcery? With maybe it's going to be has like over the top stuff like anything goes. Maybe it's Thundar the Barbarian, maybe it's mutants and wizards and sorcerers, or maybe it's just sort of that sort of standard medieval, pseudo medieval trope that Dungeons and Dragons kind of embraces. And so that's sort of like that's the sort of the play style. And then you talk about like what's the tone? Is it going to be, like I said, is it really over the top? Is it going to be more serious? Is it going to be, or is it going to have a lot of humor but still have its moments of seriousness? Or is it going to be like really weird and wacky, like kind of anything goes? Maybe there's like I said, robots and mutants, and there's some science fiction mixed in with the fantasy, and all kinds of crazy genres. Is it more like Eberron, or is it you know magic with tech, Numenera as an example, or other things? So you want to talk about those things up front in your session zero. You also might want to talk about where is this game gonna be set? Are we playing in the Forgotten Realms? Are we playing in Ravenloft? Are we playing in Eberron, Greyhawk even, or maybe even a third party setting? Like Midgard from it's Kobold Press, I think it is, and or one of the other ones. You have all these different game worlds that are available to you, not just from Wizards of the Coast, but from other publishers. Or maybe you just want to homebrew something of your own. And then, last, there's also what's called the social contract. This is another thing you want to kind of talk about in session zero. And really, the social contract is just like, what are the behavioral rules at the table? What's the etiquette? Is there in-game conflict going to be allowed? Are you going to allow people to uh, players to fight one another? Like, can their party members be mad at each other? Can they steal from each other? Now, as as a first time game master or dungeon master, I try to stay away from that. I have a whole article about social contract that I'll link in the description below. But really, what you want to emphasize is the table manners of you're all in a team, you're all trying to work together. So don't make a character that is going to cause trouble for the rest of the party. Like if the one player wants to be that chaotic jerk that is, what I mean. They're borderline evil, and they're going to cause all kinds of ruckus and trouble. Where the rest of the players want to just play kind of like standard heroes. Um, Talk about those things up front. Say, you know what, we want to play a game where we're all kind of working towards a common goal. So let's not have any evil. Let's not have too much chaos. Let's make sort of standard characters that can work together. That would be friends. That would want to be hanging out together and would trust each other with their lives. So you talk about all those things in the session zero because that sets the overall baseline tone for your game and for your players. And so everybody is going to come to the table with sort of similar expectations of how the game will play. And so that helps you get those first few steps in your game going and making it more enjoyable because then nobody's like disappointed or maybe something bad happens or again there's one player that's misbehaving and kind of ruining it for everybody else. If you kind of get that out of the way, those discussions out of the way up front, you're gonna set yourself up for success down the road. So that's sort of point one, session zero. And again, I have a couple articles on my blog about session zero and the social contract, and I'll link them below in the notes. Point two. So, yeah. Before we move on to point two, sorry. The other thing you might actually end up talking about, oddly enough, is you say, "Hey, we want to play D&D, and maybe like some of that genre, some of the genre ideas come in." And then somebody says, "Well, can we play like a Dragon Age type game?" And then you realize, well, wait, there's a Dragon Age RPG. We could get Dragon Age, and you may decide you don't want to play D&D. Well, maybe this time, or maybe they want to play a superhero game, or maybe they want to play maybe they want to play Star Wars or The Expanse. And maybe after some discussion, people are like, I want to do some science fiction. I'm not really feeling the fantasy right now, and maybe they want to branch out. Those types of conversations can come up in that session zero. Now we are talking about D&D, but I just wanted to bring up those potential things that might come up that people might talk about during their session zeros. That once they start talking about genre, they might realize that maybe they don't want fantasy. Maybe they want something a little crazier. Maybe they want post-apocalyptic. Like I said, superheroes, sci-fi. Any number of genres, or something that's fantasy adjacent, like Numenera, which is fantasy and sci-fi. It's kind of mixed together, or other similar games. So again, get those expectations, set that baseline during session zero. All right, now, second point. Start small and then grow larger. So what do I mean by that? Well, what you probably want to do is don't think about a long campaign right off the bat. If this is your first time DMing, or when not maybe not your first time, but you're just getting started. Maybe you ran a small campaign or you ran a few small adventures, but you want to do something a little longer. Try to maybe limit the scope of your first few campaigns to just a few levels, like first through fifth level, as an example, something along those lines. Um, and maybe you want to, I know Wizards of the Coast has all these big hardback, adventures, Icewind Dale and Storm King's Thunder, and this bad boy is like what 300 pages ish. I want to say, yeah, over 300 pages for Rime of the Frost Maiden. Um, Storm King's Thunder is not quite 300, but it's a pretty thick, heavy, and these campaigns span from first level all the way up through 10th or 12th or sometimes even larger. And what I would say is maybe don't do the big books right off the bat. Start with something smaller. Start with the starter set or the essentials kit. Honestly, of the two, well, I'll talk more about this later, but start with something that's like first through fifth level. There's also Waterdeep Dragon Heist, the Ghost of Saltmarsh, like some of the books where it's not a full campaign, but there's like little smaller, shorter adventures that you can throw in. Tales from the Yawning Portal, Ghost of Saltmarsh. But honestly, if you haven't run either of these, the Phandalin campaigns, you could actually purchase both of these because they're set in the same town. You could use them together, but what I would just say is start with something a little smaller in scope. Don't work on that first through 12th level campaign right out the door. It just, for a new dungeon master, it's a lot to sort of keep track. There's a lot of moving gears. You have to set up and you have to foreshadow, and there's just it's a lot of work to really dig into those big, heavy, longer campaign books. And so I absolutely recommend starting out with something shorter. And you don't even have to get something from Wizards of the Coast. There are adventures, shorter adventures that are come from third party. Troll Lord Games, Assault on Blacktooth Ridge. This is like a first through third. It could probably actually can even go up to fifth level. Sort of starter adventure. It's like 64 pages, or about. Actually, this one, yeah, 40. This one's actually only about 40 pages and change. It's a short little campaign with a home base and a couple of little dungeons and some other stuff going on. It's a nice compact thing. There's also Goodman Games puts out some fifth edition adventures, and these are kind of standalones, and they're very short. This one's 16 pages. They may be 16 to 20 pages. They cover maybe one or two levels. They're not a full campaign. They're just a single adventure. But you can buy a few of them and just kind of run them back to back, and it's sort of a monster of the week idea. You don't have this overarching huge plot. You just kind of set up a situation. You run them through the one dungeon for several sessions, and then you move on to the next thing. Start out with little smaller chunks like that. These types of log on to dmsguild.com. Millions of, there's so many adventures I can't even get into recommending them. There are places out on the net that have a listing of what adventures are and people who've reviewed them and whatnot. But start with those shorter, more compact campaigns that just span a few levels, just to get your feet wet before you dive into something huge. Work on those smaller, tighter adventures. And you may not, if you're not doing one of these big books, you might want to just, again, if you're using these short adventures, homebrew something. So give the players, consider where their home base is going to be, what village or town they're going to be working out of, and then just think about the immediate surroundings of that one particular. Don't worry about like the whole Sword Coast or the entire central, the western Flaness of Greyhawk, or the continent, whatever continent is in Eberron, or focus just on a local area that your party can kind of run around in, with a town, maybe a nearby city, a larger city, another village, like two or three little locations, and then a couple adventuring sites. Maybe there's some ruins over here. Maybe there's an old castle, abandoned castle. There's a cave system. Just a few things that you can sprinkle around the map to get their attention. And so you're starting very local. They're exploring. They're getting to know the town that they're starting out in, the NPCs that are in that town. Flesh out a few NPCs in the town. Just start really small and work your way up from there. You don't have to think about these big campaign arcs like some of the books do that Wizards of the Coast writes. There's no need to jump into some giant we have to save the world campaign. A lot of the best D&D are little things where you're working with locals and you're doing something that affects the local region, or you're just adventuring around, you're checking out ruins, you're doing stuff like that. You don't have to, not every adventure has to be throw the ring into Mount Doom. It's just, it doesn't have to be, world ending or world saving event. Start small. Like I said, home base, a couple of venturing locations, some rumors, some are true, some are false about things that are going on, that sort of thing. So that's point two. Point three, which is sort of related to point two, kind of this dovetails right into the next bit. Don't write a plot. Don't write a story like one of these big adventure books. Here's the thing that what you want to do is set up hooks, set up little scenarios, little adventure hooks for your party. And let me give you an example of what you probably shouldn't do. I was reading on a very popular D&D site. This was a couple years ago that I saw this, but it stuck in my mind because it really, I remember reading this. I was like, you know what, this is they're trying to give advice to new dungeon masters, and I thought it was really the wrong approach, because they were talking about, hey, let's write a pirate campaign. And so they wrote out this plot. Oh, the party is going to hear about some pirate raiding the shores. So, okay, well, that means they have to go to this town and figure out how to acquire a boat or get passage on a boat. So they have to go to this town, get a boat. Then they're going to go out in the boat and they're going to encounter some pirates. And then they're going to get captured by pirates. Okay, so they get captured by the pirates, and then they find out, oh, there's this pirate king. And there's lots of these little rival pirate groups. And the pirate king is he's creating a power structure among some groups. But some of these other rival pirate groups, they don't like this pirate king. So maybe the players will ally themselves with these rival pirate groups in order to fight against the pirate king, and that's how they work out their freedom. And then so they ally with the rivals, and then they have a ship, and then they get into this huge epic sea battle with the pirate king, and then there's this blah 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 blah. And so the writer who was giving this example had written an entire plot that the players were supposed to follow. They're supposed to get captured. They're supposed to ally themselves. What if the players don't want to do that? Or what if they're fighting the pirates and the players succeed and they don't get captured? Like, what if they actually win? Don't force them into a situation where they get captured. Like, just say, oh, you lose, no. If they're going to be fighting with pirates, there's a chance they could win. Or maybe they do lose and they get captured. But they may not want to do this linear railroad where every step of the way has been planned for them. As a matter of fact, very few people want to play a game where every step of the way is already predestined, because then that means that they don't have what's called player agency. They have whatever they do, there's no effect on the world. They're stuck on this train. They're watching a movie, and they can't change what happens to their characters in the movie. And that's what's great about D&D is that it's unscripted. If they want to do something else, maybe they don't want to ally themselves with the rivals. Maybe they want to do a turncoat thing and they go to the Pirate King and they go, hey, look, these guys are trying to get together and go against you. And I'll tell you what, we will work for you against them as your double agent, or something. Maybe they decide to take over that group of rivals themselves. It could be any number of things. The point is don't pre-plan all that stuff. Don't write a plot because your players may not want to do the plot you're writing. They may want to do something completely different, or they might be like, you could write this whole big pirate campaign, and they get into the first few sessions of it, and they're just like, yeah, I'm not really feeling this pirate thing. We're gonna go back to shore and do something else. We just they don't have that interest in whatever this plot that you've concocted. For whatever reason, it doesn't strike their fancy, and that happens. That happens a lot. So now you've done all this writing, this narrative that you have, this whole campaign that you've written pages and pages and pages about, and they're not interested. So don't write a plot, don't write a story. What you want to do is write scenarios, little story hooks that they can react to. And let me give you an example. There are a couple of really great games out there, like called Apocalypse World or Dungeon World, and they have these things called fronts. And what a front is basically a setup of a scenario. It's not a whole plot, it's just a setup. So what you think about when you think about a front is what is the main threat, and basically what would happen with that threat if there weren't a party of heroes to stop it. And so you write just a few sentence summary. What's the threat? The Archmage Khadgar wants to open the dark portal. Okay, that's your overarching, your front, your theme. So Archmage wants to open a dark portal, and then you write up just a few details of what are sort of the steps, what are the signs that the players might come across to let them find out that something is going on. So maybe there's roving bands of humanoids. Maybe there's gnolls, or there's somebody's working for the Archmage, and they're running around looking for some artifacts or something like that because he wants to do this ritual and he wants to open this portal. So you put out the rumors about his minions or other people running around doing his bidding, or an artifact has been stolen, or whatnot. But there's huge groups of undead that are wandering the countryside for whatever reason. The point is that you create these little scenarios, these little snippets of things that occur that are setups for the larger threat that's going on. And then once you've done that, you decide, well, okay, so what would happen if no PCs, get involved? What happens if the dark portal is opened? Is there a flood of creatures from another plane? Demons, angels, undead? Who knows? But the point is, you figure out what happens if the PCs do nothing about that. And it doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to trigger it, because the idea is you set up a few of these little index card sized ideas. They're just a few sentences. And then you start feeding some of the rumors to your group, to your party, and let them follow whichever ones take their interest. And so, maybe they don't decide not to do the somebody's opening a dark portal, for whatever reason, the hook doesn't catch them. It doesn't mean that you automatically say, okay, the Archmage succeeds and all this terrible. Maybe somebody else goes to stop them. But what you can do is you can just set that idea aside and work with the idea that they do like. And so, what you need to have is a few of these sort of alternative ideas set up in advance. Write a few of these fronts, as they're called in Dungeon World and Apocalypse World, and have different paths that the players could follow. And then as they follow them, you then sort of stay a couple sessions ahead in terms of, okay, well, what's going to happen next week? What did they do, and how is the perceived threat? How is the reaction from that threat? What happens basically, and be prepared to abandon ideas or change them, because your party is going to be interested in some things and not interested in others. So you have to be a little bit fleet of foot. But the most important thing is you want your players to have that agency, that when they do something to sort of affect these events that are in progress, that there should be an impact, like that the world reacts to them, that they're making changes, that they don't necessarily, they're not on this rail that no matter what they're going to go A, B, C, D, E. Maybe depending on what they do, there's branches. But the idea is that you have to give them that freedom and ability to explore in possibly different directions. So if you write out a whole scripted plot, you're forcing them down a single lane hallway. Whereas if you set up scenarios and hooks where you haven't written out the plot, but you've just got like ideas of things that might happen, you can then react to the actions of your players. The other thing to consider is have some non-combat options. There may be ways to stop what's going on, or to change the flow of the story based on not just fighting and killing things, but maybe other things that you can done. Negotiations with people, getting kings or dukes or other people involved, and think about the role playing side as well as the combat side. Don't just think about who are they going to fight, who do they have to kill. Think about other ways that they can resolve some of these ideas. And you could have a front that is more of a combat thing, and then you could have a different event that's more of like a political intrigue thing. So you could just jot down these ideas on index cards, and then pull them out as you need them. So that way you can be sort of nimble on your feet when your group wants to do something slightly different. And if you do decide to run like one of the smaller campaigns, just be prepared to go off book a little bit. Read it. Think about what the NPC motivations are, what the monster motivations are. If there's orcs, what are they doing? What are they? How are they living their life? Why is there a conflict between the party and this other group? And is there a way to, again, approach that conflict in a non-combat manner, or do you just have to kill these guys because they're doing something bad? Just think of different alternatives, and again, set up the situation. Don't write the plot, just set up the situation, and then react to how your players then interact and create their own plot. Think of it as it's your world, but it's everybody's story. It's everybody at the table. Your story, the player's story, everybody's adding into this big soup, this stew. So it's not just you writing a plot and them following it, just like they're watching a movie or reading a novel. No, you're building something, and it may go in a direction you don't expect. So that's number 4. Number 5. This one's a little bit more controversial. There's been a lot of discussion about this on social media. There are some people that roll behind their Dungeon Master screen, roll the dice, and for the purpose of story, they want the story to go in a specific direction. They lie about what the result on the die is, because maybe they want to make it more exciting or whatever, but they want to change something that the dice says it should be this way. I would lean away from doing that, especially as a new game master, and the reason is it can actually harm your campaign if you don't really know what you're doing, and you're changing the die results a lot, and you start to railroad them down a specific corridor of plot. Again, you're taking away that ability of their being able to affect the game by their actions, because you're now guiding the storyline rather than having the actions of the group direct the storyline. And what some people will often say is, well, what if there's going to be a TPK? What if this combat's going very badly, and you think everybody's going to die and it's going to suck and everybody's not going to want to play anymore, stuff like that. That's one of the things that you can actually talk about during the session 0, which I talked about earlier, is ask your players at the very beginning of the campaign, hey, if there's a combat and for whatever reason things, because of bad dice luck or whatever, things start to go south, do you want to roll with the situation, see if you can just extract yourselves, and if people die, or do you want me as the game master, as the dungeon master, to intervene in some way, provide extra help that comes in, or mitigate the danger, lessen the danger if you get in over your heads. To talk about that playstyle philosophy. Do they want it more deadly and dangerous? And if they make a bad decision, well, that's on them and they might die. Or, maybe it wasn't even a bad decision. Maybe just, again, the dice rolled badly. They miss and the bad guys are doing really well and take down the cleric, and now there's no healing, and, things start to spin out of control. Sometimes those moments are really tense and actually become really, really fun, because they might actually win or at least persevere in some way at the end. Now, I do a whole video on fudging. So if you want to think about that topic more, I absolutely recommend, looking at my video and telling you why I personally don't fudge the dice. Some people do, and it is a play style choice. But what I ask is you should probably be upfront with your players about that play style choice. Do they want a more dangerous game, or do they want something where there's a little bit of, what do you call it? Padded walls. There's slightly padded walls, so that if things totally go off the rails, they don't just, go off a cliff. Maybe they bounce off the guardrails. Again, it's a playstyle preference. I would just say, as if this is one of your first outings as a game master, I would just maybe steer away from changing the dice roll and lying to your players about that. It's just, it sets up a bad trust issue right from the start. There are people that would disagree with me. There are lots of people that would, but there's a lot of people that agree with me. So it's one of those things that it's a very contentious discussion point. Again, just talk to your players. Ask them what type of play style that they want. They want more grim and gritty. They want it difficult. They want, or just, do they want that little extra? Okay, you know what? They're the heroes of the story. We know when we read to the end of the novel, maybe one of the characters might die, or possibly two of the characters die. But we're in general, we're going to keep them somewhat safe. But that does remove some of the danger of the game, which is part of the fun. And that's something you need to talk to your players about too at the very beginning. How dangerous is it? Do you mind if your character dies? That's sometimes that's just part of the game, and it kind of sucks for in the moment it happens, but it also usually creates these really great stories later. And it's up to you. I would just say steer clear of it as a beginner. Steer clear of fudging dice. There's lots of other things you can do. If things start going bad, maybe they do get captured. Again, the pirates capture them, take them prisoner, and you can go on a different tangent with that. There's nothing wrong with that. Absolutely. Everything doesn't have to be death. Surrender. Tell them they can surrender. Tell them they can run away. Tell them, maybe they get captured. There's lots of options to avoid killing the entire party. So let me very briefly talk about, again, the starter set and the essentials kit. Those are pretty much my 5 pieces of advice. But getting back, if you haven't run the starter set and the essentials kit, now both of these are really great little campaigns. 1st through 5th level. They can be used together, if you want to extend things out a little bit, but they're well run independently. This one, the starter set, has more of a linear storyline. It is kind of a little bit on rails. You do this thing at the beginning. There's an ambush at the beginning, and then you go to town, and then you can explore different areas, but it kind of has a plot line that runs through the whole thing. The Essentials kit, on the other hand, is a little bit less plot driven. It has lots of little encounters that are based around um, the town of Fandalen, and obviously there's a dragon encounter that can culminate towards the end of the campaign. But there's not really a single plot line that goes through everything. There are some little things that some of the encounters are somewhat connected, but it's not, like I said, it's not like a steady plot line. And I actually like this better because of that for a beginning DM, because you're not worried about all the machinations of the things that are going on behind the scenes. You set up a scenario, the players engage with it, then they're done, and then they can go on to the next thing, and they can follow lots of different threads. So I do rate the Essentials kit slightly higher because of that. But the starter set has a really good adventure as well. And if you haven't played those are great ways to start. But again, there are lots of third party, Assault on Blacktooth Ridge. This is a great sort of starter. It's probably a little bit more work than the Essentials kit and the starter set, just because of the way those are written very much for a beginner DM, and it is kind of assumes that you have a little bit of experience with RPGs. But Assault on Blacktooth Ridge is a good starter sort of opening campaign. And there are many others on the DM's Guild and others by third-party publishers, aside from Wizards of the Coast. So I'm going to wrap this up. It's gone on a little bit too long, but I hope those 5 things will sort of get you moving in the right direction of bettering yourself as a dungeon master. So that's pretty much it. I'm Marty. I'm known as Raging Owlbear on social media. I have a blog and I do these videos. I'm going to link to the various articles I have as well about the social contract, about session 0, about fudging dice, about some of these things that I've talked about. I have numerous articles, and that's one of the things. That's the other thing that you can do to make yourself a better DM is keep reading advice, keep watching videos, look for the stuff that really speaks to you, and for those people that might have a play style that's similar to yours, and take everything with a grain of salt too. Not everybody's an expert, except for me. But as I say, there's lots of advice out there, and some of it conflicts. So you just have to feel what you think is good for your players. But definitely lean towards being a little bit more improv and agile with your scenarios. I would say try not to do a plot, a pre-planned plot early on. Give your players a little bit more freedom, and then you have more freedom to sort of adjust and change things as you want. Even if you're doing one of the pre-planned, pre-written adventures, there's a lot of room for you to improv stuff and go off on a tangent and do other things. Absolutely do that. Do whatever strikes your fancy, and write down your little scenario ideas on an index card. Like I said, just jot down quick notes. Nothing more than 3, 4, maybe 5 sentences at most. Again, I've been Marty. I'm known as Raging Owlbear. I have a blog. I do these videos. I play some games on Twitch every once in a while. So check me out. Give me a like. Give me a follow. Give me a subscribe. Whatever. Click the buttons. Click the buttons. That'll help me out. I appreciate it. And have a good day.